Hello and welcome back to the TikATeeMethod. My name is Ron Castingway, longtime educator, composer, author, conductor, clinician, and performer. Thank you so much for joining me here for week 12, yet another milestone video. When we complete today's video, we will officially be 1/3 of the way through my book, Rhythmic Sight Reading, the TikATeeMethod. So congratulations to you on coming this far, and thank you for joining me on this rhythmic journey. I really do hope that these supplemental videos are proving to be great resources as you go through my book. In today's video, we are going to be discussing something I like to call reversed dotted rhythms. We're going to be adding 3 new musical sight words to our vocabulary arsenal. 2 of them will be 2 beats long, 1 of them will be 1 beat long. All of them will create syncopation through dotted rhythms. It's going to be really fun. I hope you'll stick around for the whole video, do some exercises with me because we're going to get started right now. All right, here we are at week 12, and as you can see, we've got a lot to discuss. However, there's only one question posed throughout. What if the dotted note is second in line? For example, back in week 6, I introduced the dotted quarter note to the 8th note rhythm. What if we had the 8th note come first and then the dotted quarter note? This is what I call a reversed dotted rhythm, and this will create 8th note syncopation. Back in week 9, I introduced the dotted quarter note to 2 16th notes. We can reverse that rhythm as well, put the 2 16th notes first and then the dotted quarter note, another reversed dotted rhythm that creates 8th note syncopation. And last week in week 11, I introduced the dotted 8th note to 16th note. We can reverse this one so the 16th note is first, followed by the dotted 8th note. This will create 16th note syncopation and will only be a 1-beat rhythmic motif. So we've got 3 new musical vocabulary words, all of which the dotted note will come second in line, second in the pattern. So let's get into the math and the verbiage of these right now. Let's take one rhythmic motif at a time. Let's start with the 8th note going to the dotted quarter note. Now, just to review all the way back from week 6, we know that the dotted quarter note to 8th note rhythm sounds like this. Ta, ti, ta, ti. That was that 2-beat rhythmic pattern happening 2 consecutive times in a 4/4 measure. We know that the dotted quarter note is ta. We know that the 8th note is ti. Well, if we reverse them, that doesn't change the verbiage. Our 8th note is still ti, and our dotted quarter note is still ta. The only difference is going to be the rhythm. And if we look at the beat breakdown here at the bottom of the page, this rhythm on the left-hand side is the rhythm we're talking about right now. We've got our 8th note coming in on the downbeat, and in these exercises today, it'll either be on beat 1 or on beat 3. And then we've got an upbeat of beat 1 here on that dotted quarter note. And I always put an accent over that dotted quarter note because in syncopated music, most often it is stylistically accurate to accent syncopation. And it also helps us perform the rhythm better. So this dotted quarter note will come in on the end of 1, and that's where we get this 8th note syncopation, and it creates 8th note syncopation because that dotted quarter note will be on the upbeat. Let me show you what it sounds like 2 consecutive times in a 4/4 measure. Ti-ta, ti-ta. All right, so I hope that makes sense. What I'll do now is I'll do 2 consecutive dotted quarter note to 8th note rhythms, and then 2 consecutive 8th note to dotted quarter note rhythms, so you can hear the difference between week 6 and today. Ta, ti-ta, ti-ti-ta, ti-ta. So that's the pattern on the left-hand side, the 8th note to the dotted quarter note. Let's now look at the rhythmic motif in the center of the page, the one that's 2 16th notes going to the dotted quarter note. Now, this one has a lot of similarities to the 8th note going to the dotted quarter note, but instead of the 8th note, we've just broken it down into 2 16th notes. Let's recall back to week 9 when I introduced the dotted quarter note to 2 16th notes, and I'll demonstrate this 2 consecutive times in a 4/4 measure. Ta, ticka, ta, ticka. So hopefully you remember that rhythm. And you'll hear that the dotted quarter note is ta and the two 16th notes are Tik-A. Well, if we reverse this rhythm, it doesn't change the verbiage. The two 16th notes remain Tik-A and the dotted quarter note remains ta. The only difference is the order and the syncopation that this rhythm creates. Let's look again at this beat breakdown here at the rhythm on the right, the one we're talking about right now. We'll see that these two 16th notes come in on the downbeat. And little side note here, in all of our exercises today, these two beat musical sight words will either happen on beat 1 and 2 or on beat 3 and 4. And in the example right here, it's coming in on beat 1, making this dotted quarter note come in on the upbeat of beat 1. And remember, we're accenting it to help us perform it more accurately because that is stylistically correct when we have syncopated rhythms. So 2 consecutive in a row in a 4/4 measure. Here's what today's rhythm sounds like. 3, 4. Tik-A-taw, tik-a-taw. So I'll do what I did before. I'll do week 9's rhythm followed by week 12's rhythm. Taw, tik-a-taw, tik-a-tik-a-taw, tik-a-taw. Pretty straightforward, and it creates some really cool, nice 8th note syncopation in this rhythm. So if I was to do the first rhythm and the second rhythm together in a measure, here's what they sound like. Tee-taw, tik-a-taw, tee-taw, tik-a-taw. That's our first 2 2-beat musical motifs here from week 12. Let's get into now a little more complicated. Let's get into this 1-beat musical sight word where our 16th note is followed by a dotted 8th note. And in this 1-beat motif right here is going to be our first exception to the TikAtee verbiage rule. And there's really good reason behind it. But first, if you haven't seen week 11's video on the dotted 8th note going to the 16th note, now would be a good time to go check that out so that you can better conceptualize what happens when we reverse the role of these notes in today's rhythm. And to recap what the dotted 8th note, 16th note rhythm sounds like, let's say we have 4 of them occurring consecutively in a 4/4 measure, it would sound like this. Tee-a, 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 tee-a. And the TikAtee verbiage adapted very nicely to that dotted 8th note being T and that last 16th note being ah of our Tik-A pattern. However, in today's 1-beat pattern, and when we reverse this rhythm so the 16th note is first and the dotted 8th note is second, I want to make sure that we understand that it's 16th note syncopation. And in order to do so, we're changing up how we adapt the TikAtee verbiage to this rhythm ever so slightly. Let me show you what I mean. I want to draw your attention all the way to the bottom of the page in this box that I just circled. This is one of the 2 reasons why we're ever so slightly adapting the TikAtee verbiage to this 1-beat rhythmic pattern. It's a lot easier to say Tik-A, 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 Tik-A than it is to say Tik-Tee, 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 Tik-Tee. So by adapting this just a little bit, it makes it easier to vocalize. However, that's not the main reason why we're changing it up. I want musicians and students to remember that this 1-beat rhythmic pattern creates 16th note syncopation and not 8th note syncopation. So if we were to keep that dotted 8th note as T, not only is it a little harder to say, but it may be confusing and students may misinterpret this rhythm as 8th note syncopation. So by changing it up ever so slightly, Tik-A, 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 we're doing 2 things. Number 1, we're making it easier to vocalize. And number 2, we're being reminded that this 1-beat rhythmic pattern is creating 16th note syncopation. And in the diagram above the box that I just circled, you'll see how the math works for this pattern. And this should, honestly, look really familiar to what we did in week 11 for our dotted 8th note to 16th note pattern. It is literally just reversed. Let's take a look at it. Here we have our 4 16th notes, and I'm boxing the last 3, compressing those into a dotted 8th note and bringing it up into our pattern. Therefore, the first 16th note, this one right here that I just circled, is just being brought up right here into that downbeat. So we've got a 16th note occurring on the downbeat, and then that dotted 8th note occurring on that second 16th note. Now, where did I get ah, and why are we holding ah in this pattern? Let's take a look at it. Imagine we have 4 16th notes. I've got my note heads, my stems, my 2 beams right here, and we know that it's going to be Tik-A, Tik-A. Well, those of you that really understand ties, and again, ties are coming up really soon, if we were to tie or connect these last 3 16th notes, we would hold this ah syllable all the way to the end. Therefore, we have Tik-A, and there's our second 16th note, and we're holding it out for that full value. So this is some of the math behind where we get this reverse dotted 8th note, 16th note rhythm, the dotted reverse rhythm being 16th note first and then dotted 8th note. And again, just so we can hear it one more time, here it happens 4 times consecutively in a 4/4 measure. Here it is. Tik-A, 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 Tik-A. So it's literally reversed from week 11's rhythm. All right, let's close out this page by looking at the box in the center. These are things to remember about reverse dotted rhythms. Number 1, they all result in syncopation. So let's look at our 3 patterns today. We have the 8th note going to the dotted quarter note. Teet-ta, teet-ta, a 2-beat rhythmic pattern that results in 8th note syncopation. Our second motif, 2 16th notes going to a dotted quarter note. Tik-A-ta, Tik-A-ta, another 2-beat rhythm pattern that results in 8th note syncopation because that dotted quarter note comes in on the upbeat. And then our final motif for today, a 1-beat rhythmic pattern, is the 16th note to the dotted 8th note, which is Tik-A, 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 and that one results in 16th note syncopation, which is why we ever so slightly change the verbiage for this one to remember that that is indeed 16th note syncopation. Number 2, we want to hold the second note, the dotted note, full value all the way to the next applicable downbeat. So important, and I've been preaching this since week 1. We've got to hold our notes full value. So in these today, teet-ta, teet-ta, Tik-A-ta, Tik-A-ta, Tik-A, 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 Tik-A. I'm holding that dotted note full value to the next applicable downbeat, and we'll work on that in the exercises. And number 3 only applies to our last 1-beat rhythmic pattern. This one is talking about the verbiage that we just discussed. The verbiage for the 16th note to the dotted 8th note is one exception to our rule. The dotted 8th note in this particular case is not T, but is rather ah. Again, the 2 reasons behind this. Number 1, easier vocalization, and number 2, to remind us that this is creating 16th note syncopation. All right, we've gone through this page in great detail. I hope you are now wrapping your head around these 3 musical sight words. It is time to go to the exercises and practice. Okay, here we are at exercise 12H. So you'll notice I'm changing it up just a little bit. I'm not automatically going to the first 2 exercises in week 12. The first 2 exercises usually include the Tik-A-tee verbiage. You'll see in this one that it doesn't. That's because I want to go a little bit later in the exercises for this week so we can be sure we incorporate all 3 of our new musical sight words into each exercise we do in this video. I've also changed up the metronome to my Boss DB90. I've got a webcam on it, and we'll try that out when we perform. But first, let's get into the analysis for exercise 12H. In measure 1, we have one of our new musical sight words for week 12, the 2 16th notes going to that dotted quarter note. We know that it's a 2-beat pattern, so the invisible bar line will land right here. Our 2 16th notes come in on beat 1, and this dotted quarter note comes in on the upbeat of beat 1, and we hold it full value until this quarter note on beat 3. And then we have another quarter note on beat 4. Measure 2, we have another one of our rhythmic motifs for week 12, the 8th note to the dotted quarter note. We know that this one is also a 2-beat pattern, so the invisible bar line will go right after it. This 8th note comes in on the downbeat of 1, this dotted quarter note on the upbeat of beat 1, and we hold it full value all the way to this quarter note on beat 3. And we have another quarter note on beat 4. Moving to the third measure, we have our third motif for week 12, the one beat rhythmic pattern, 16th note to the dotted 8th note. So we know that that's one beat. This quarter note will happen on beat 2. We have an invisible bar line right here. Then we have T, T, Ta. Now going back to beat 1, we know this 16th note is going to come in on beat 1. This dotted 8th note is going to be the second 16th note, Tik-A, and we're going to hold that ah full value up until that quarter note on beat 2. Okay, moving on to measure 4. Tik-A, Tik-A, T, T, invisible bar line, and then we've got our 8th note to dotted quarter note pattern from week 12. We know that this is a 2-beat pattern, so the 8th note comes in on 1, and this dotted quarter note comes in on the upbeat of beat 1. We hold that full value, but while we're holding it, we know that we have to be looking ahead at the next line. It's really important to be looking ahead when we sight read whenever it's possible. Let's go to measure 5. And here we can see that we have the pattern from week 9 immediately followed by our pattern for week 12. It's kind of cool. Check this out. We have week 9's pattern, this dotted quarter note to 2 16th notes. We know that this is going to be on beat 1 for this dotted quarter, and these 2 16th notes are going to be on the upbeat of beat 2. The invisible bar line is going to squeeze right here in between these 16th notes. Then we have week 12's pattern, which we know is also 2 beats, except it's the reverse of week 9's pattern. These 2 16th notes come in on beat 3, and then this dotted quarter note comes in on the upbeat of beat 3 and is held all the way full value up until this quarter note on beat 1 of measure 6. So that's pretty cool, having week 9's rhythm and then week 12's rhythm. Brings a lot of relevance in how you can see that reverse dotted rhythm. Okay, going on to measure 6, we've got that quarter note. We've got a quarter rest on beat 2, invisible bar line, quarter note on beat 3, quarter rest on beat 4. A really nice, easy measure here. Then measure 7, we've got the 8th note to our dotted quarter note pattern, which we know is one of our patterns from week 12. This 8th note comes in on beat 1. This quarter note comes in on the upbeat of beat 1 and is held all the way until beat 3. We can write -3 there because we know this is going to last for 2 full beats. Okay? Then we've got our half rest that takes up beats 3 and 4. The first beat of measure 8 is one of our new patterns, this 2 16th notes to the dotted quarter note. We know that takes up beats 1 and beats 2, with the 2 16th notes coming in on the downbeat and that dotted quarter note coming up on the upbeat of beat 1. Then we have an invisible bar line right here. We've got a quarter rest on beat 3. We have an 8th rest on beat 4 with the and of 4 or the upbeat of 4 with that 8th note. So this exercise is actually going to end on one single flagged 8th note on the and of or the upbeat of beat 4. Very cool stuff in this exercise, and all 3 of our new musical motifs for week 12 are included in this one exercise. So we've gone through it, we've analyzed it. Let's go perform it with the metronome. Okay, the first thing I did was remove the blue ink from this exercise so you can see it a little more clearly. However, you'll notice again that the TikATee verbiage is not included in this exercise. So if you want to pause the video now and write that in, feel free to do so and then press play again and join me on the exercise. Okay, we're going to perform it right now. Our metronome is going to be at 74 beats per minute, or the quarter note equals 74. We'll get the Boss DB90 started. Here is the G3 that I'll be singing this exercise on. You're welcome to join me on this pitch, an octave higher, an octave lower, or a different pitch altogether, but I hope you'll join me in vocalizing the rhythms for exercise 12H. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, and Tik-A-ta, ta, ta, ti, ta, 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 Tik-A, ta, ti, ti, ta, Tik-A, Tik-A, ti, 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 ta, ta, Tik-A, Tik-A, ta, 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 ti, ta, Tik-A, ta, ti. All right. We'll stop that metronome. You heard me hold the notes as full value as I could, but there were no rests until measure 6 of this exercise, so I had to truncate some of the notes ever so slightly so that I could sneak a breath in there, but I hope that we got the rhythm right. Let's find out now by going to the MP3 for exercise 12H. Okay, here we are at my website where you can find all 363 of the MP3s that accompany my book. We, of course, are looking at exercise 12H, and we know from previous videos that we have 3 options here. Option number 1, we can just listen to the MP3 and check for our accuracy that way. Option number 2, we can sing along and vocalize the rhythms along with the MP3. Or option number 3, if our instrument isn't primarily the voice, we can break out our instrument and play our instrument along with the MP3. So without further ado, here is exercise 12H. One, two, three, four. Tik-A, ta, ta, ti, ta, 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 Tik-A, ta, ti, ti, ta, Tik-A, Tik-A, ti, 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 ta, ta, Tik-A, Tik-A, ta, 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 ti, ta, Tik-A, ta, ti. And there you have it, exercise 12H. So if you did not choose option 3 and playing your instrument with the MP3, now is the time to do that. Break out a metronome and a tempo that you're comfortable with and perform exercise 12H on your instrument. Okay, before moving on to exercise 12I, here is a performance of exercise 12H. One, two, three, four. Let's now move on to exercise 12I. And in the very first measure, on the very first beat, we have one of our new 3 musical sight words, the 16th to the dotted 8th note. And we know this has 16th note syncopation, and we know that it's 1 beat long. So that is beat 1. Beat 2 is this quarter note, followed by an invisible bar line. Beats 3 and 4, ti, ti, ta. Measure 2, we have another one of our 2-beat musical sight words from this week, ti, ta. That 8th note to that dotted quarter note, we know that that takes up 2 beats, downbeat for that 8th note, and the upbeat of beat 1 for that dotted quarter note, and we're going to accent it. Then we've got an invisible bar line with 2 quarter notes on beats 3 and 4. In measure 3, Tik-A, we've got our 2 16th notes to our dotted quarter note, and again a 2-beat musical sight word, the 16th notes coming in on beat 1, and on the upbeat of beat 1, that accented dotted quarter note, followed by an invisible bar line and 2 quarter notes on beats 3 and 4. Measure 4, Tik-A, Tik-A, Tik-A-tee. There's an old school one that we went over. Do you remember what week it was? Then we have an invisible bar line. Then we've got another one. We've got our ti, ta, 8th note to dotted quarter note, 2-beat pattern here from week 12. We know that this 8th note is on beat 3, and that this dotted quarter note is on the upbeat of beat 3. And we're going to hold it full value, but we're also going to be looking ahead while we're holding it to measure 5 on the next line. Here we go. And in measure 5, we've got a repeated pattern. Tik-A, ta, Tik-A, ta. These are the types of things that musicians, when they're sight reading, are looking ahead and recognizing and noticing. So on beat 1 and on beat 3, we have Tik-A, which is our 16th note to our dotted 8th note rhythm from this week, that 1-beat pattern. And each time, it's followed by a quarter note here on beat 2 and here on beat 4. Our invisible bar line going right in the center. So beats 1 and 2 and beats 3 and 4 in measure 5 are identical. They're repeated. Moving on to measure 6, we've got a quarter note on beat 1, then we've got a dotted half note on beats 2, 3, and 4. Do we need to put an invisible bar line here? Not really. A dotted half note breaks the invisible bar line. In other words, it does not accommodate the invisible bar line, but we don't need it here because we can easily digest a quarter note followed by a dotted half note. And we want to hold that as full value as we can. Moving on to measure 7, we have ti-ta, one of our musical sight words from this week. This eighth note coming in on the downbeat of 1, this dotted quarter note on the upbeat of beat 1, held all the way until we have the second pattern here from week 12, 2 16th notes to the dotted quarter note, which is also 2 beats. That comes in on beat 3, and then this dotted quarter note comes in on the upbeat of beat 3. Where is the invisible bar line here? Right in between those two 2-beat rhythmic sight words. In the last measure, we have the repeated 1-beat rhythm from week 12. Tik-A, Tik-A on beats 1 and 2. Our invisible bar line will go right here, and we close out this exercise with a nice half note on beats 3 and 4. I would tell my students to write -1 here to hold that out full value. Ta, release. And we're good to go. So a lot of good stuff in this exercise. Again, we have all 3 of our new musical sight words included in this exercise. We've analyzed it. Now we need to go perform it with a metronome. All right, the first thing we're going to do is remove all of this blue ink so you can see the exercise a little more clearly. And again, if you want to pause the video now to write in the TikATeeMethod verbiage, please feel free to do so and then just press play again and join me in performing this exercise. All right, let's turn up our metronome here and turn it on. We're going to be at 74 beats per minute, or the quarter note equals 74. And here's our G3. This is what I'll be singing the exercise on. Okay, I hope you'll join me. Here we go for exercise 12I. 1, 2, ready, and Tik-A, ta, ti-ti-ta, ti-ta, ta, ta, Tik-A, ta, 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 Tik-A, 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 ti-ti-ta, Tik-A, ta, Tik-A, ta, 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 ti-ta, Tik-A, ta, Tik-A, Tik-A, ta. All right. Stop the old metronome. Now, what did we notice in here? Well, the thing that I noticed is no rests. Where do we breathe? Well, I just truncated a couple of the notes ever so slightly so that I could sneak in breaths while staying with the metronome and maintaining the integrity of the rhythm. When you have an exercise like this and it has no rests, it's really hard to sing, but we have to do our best to keep that rhythm going. Okay, so now we've performed the exercise with a metronome. We need to go listen to the MP3, so let's go do that right now. Here we are back at my website. We are looking at exercise 12I. You know what your 3 options are, so I'm not going to waste any time. Here is the MP3 for exercise 12I. One, 2, 3, 4. Tik-A, ta, ti-ti-ta, ti-ta, ta, ta, Tik-A, ta, 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 Tik-A, 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 ti-ti-ta, Tik-A, ta, Tik-A, ta, 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 ti-ta, Tik-A, ta, Tik-A, Tik-A, ta. All right, there it is, exercise 12I. And if you have not yet performed this exercise on your instrument, break out a metronome, break out your instrument, choose a tempo that you're comfortable with, and perform this exercise on your instrument before moving on to the next exercise or the next concept. And before we head to the outro, here is a performance of exercise 12I. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, that does it for week 12. Thank you so much for joining me all the way, and congratulations, we've now made it 1/3 of the way through my book, Rhythmic Sight Reading, the TikATeeMethod. I hope you had some fun, I hope you joined me on those exercises, and I truly hope that you now have added 3 new musical sight words to your rhythmic arsenal of vocabulary. We have the 8th note to the dotted quarter note. We have 2 16th notes to a dotted quarter note. And we have the 16th note to the dotted 8th note. 2 2-beat musical sight words and 1 1-beat musical sight words. 2 of them with 8th note syncopation and 1 of them with 16th note syncopation. Some really great stuff here. Thank you again for joining me. Please, I do hope you check out my book, Rhythmic Sight Reading, the TikATeeMethod. It is available at roncastingway.com. It is also available on Amazon and at jwpepper.com. And don't forget about my store, Ron Castingway Music, on Amazon, where you can find lots of great resources for professional musicians, music educators, and music students alike. And if you haven't done so already, I do hope you'll help out the channel by please subscribing to the channel, hitting that like button, and hitting that notification bell. And if you have any comments, please leave them in the comments below. I will respond to any and all comments. Feel free to do so if you are inspired. Okay, thanks again for joining me and for your support. I will see you in lucky number week 13.